Between commercials, infomercials, and celebrity endorsements, we are spoiled for choice when it comes to what we choose to fill our kitchens with. Different pots, pans, spoons, ladles, knives, cutting boards, hell, you can even debate or even customize what kind of steel you want in your knife. And sometimes you can get lost in this choice. And I'm hoping today that with the emergence of this new channel, I can help be a bit of a guide to that. And we can have a starting point of what equipment, utensils, pots and pans I would suggest to begin your culinary journey. With that being said, welcome. My name is Cody, and welcome to Curious Kitchen. So if you made it through that introduction, thank you for sticking around and welcome. Like I said before, today we're going to talk about these guys, utensils. Just utensils, pots, pans, scales, knives, and kind of the basics or the beginning of what you should probably have or want to keep in your kitchen. Now, the equipment I talk about today is in reference to the future recipes coming forth. The next series I'm going to be talking about is stocks. So some of the basic French stocks. I may touch into like the Chinese master stock or the dashi, we'll see. After that, we're talking about knife work. So we learn how to use these safely and properly. And going forth from there, we go to sauces. And from sauces, we go to soups. And after that, when we start getting into more technical things or more like fabricating, we'll probably revisit some equipment or start mentioning more equipment you'll need. But this, in general, or not everything here, is a great starting point if you're just a home cook making any basic meal. Now, as to why you should listen or bother with me or take your time with me, thinking to yourself, oh, what does this another culinary dude have to say with a camera and another YouTube channel? And why should I listen to him? Well, that's kind of on you. That's kind of the onus kind of falls on your shoulders when it comes to if you want to listen to me. My credentials, I've been doing this for about, not YouTube, but cooking professionally for about 13 years. I've been in the kitchen since I was about 13 or 14. And I have a very expensive culinary degree. I paid way too much for it. So, there's that. I got that going for me. The reasons I'm doing this are incredibly selfish. I selfishly want to help educate people because I really like to see people succeed. Especially in the kitchens. Even if that's just helping your coworker with dicing, cutting, or making a sauce to create a larger dish to impress the chef. Or just helping, teach my little sister how to make an omelet. Those are all very gratifying things. And I hope with these series of videos, and we're talking about the fundamentals, the foundation of cooking, that you can take that, build upon them, and make your own dishes, and make your own feasts at home, or even take these skills into the professional world. Now, barring all of that, let's continue with this actual video, today's video, episode 1. And we're going to start talking about these bad boys. The humble, but ever-present cutting board. I know this angle isn't like ideal, and you're not gonna see my face for all of this, but it's what I got, and we gotta work with what I got. Anyways, let's talk about cutting boards. So, in the culinary world, there are many and many different varieties of cutting boards, shapes, sizes, materials, etc., etc. Tempered glass, I heard about titanium recently, wood, plastic, etc., etc. What we're talking about today are my two favorite / most common cutting boards you'll find in any supermarket or restaurant supply store. The wood and the plastic. Each of these have their own ups and downs, pros and cons, etc., etc. But no matter what you choose, the size of the cutting board is just as important as the material that you want to use or work with. Now, for the width of the cutting board, or I guess the length of the cutting board, you want it to be longer. Can you get a picture of that? Perfect. Longer than your knife is, or wider than your knife is long. And for the other way, you want the cutting board wider or taller, however you want to describe it, than your blade length. Not counting the handle, just the blade length, if you can see there. This will help you prevent your knife from slipping off the board, or you potentially running out of room when you're making your knife work, or going over the edge and knocking off a piece of plastic or wood or titanium, I guess, since that's a thing. The benefit of both of these cutting boards is that they allow your knife to bite. What does that mean? That means that when your knife goes down, your knife
very, 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 very microscopically bites into the cutting board and doesn't allow it to sway back and forth, unlike, you know, the back of the cutting board, which doesn't, there's the back of the knife, which doesn't have any bite to it. Both of these cutting board materials do a great job of that. Not to say there's not really hardwoods that will prevent that or make your knife slip, and not to say there's really hard composite plastics that will do the same thing. So when you're choosing one, make sure it's soft enough that your knife can bite. Most places do not sell cutting boards that don't do that. It's kind of more of a special order thing, or if you buy the tempered glass or titanium. Again, I don't know why they exist, but they do. Pros and cons. Like I said, they both cutting boards allow your knife to bite. Pros of the plastic cutting board: cheaper, wider variety of sizes and shapes that you could possibly need, and colors if you want to color code your kitchen, or if you're particular about not cutting raw meat on the same board or same kind of board after thorough washing as vegetables. That's what we call cross-contamination. So, the downsides. You can see here, my cutting board is actually kind of warped already. You can probably hear it actually. Let me see. Can you hear it? That's my cutting, me pressing down in the center. Cutting board's warped. That's really common with plastic cutting boards. Even if you get the thicker ones, these do not like heat. They don't like wet heat, they don't like dry heat, they don't like any of it. So putting these in the dishwasher is sometimes a death sentence. The best way to wash these is just soap, a score pad, and some like, you know, warm or hot running water. The benefit to them is that you can soak these. You can soak them in bleachy water, you know, a gallon of lukewarm water to a teaspoon of bleach, give them a nice soak, scrub them out with soap. Or if you don't like any of those methods, you can do a kind of a slurry or paste of equal parts of baking soda to dish soap. Kind of scrub it in there, rinse it off. And if you don't like that method, you can take some lemon juice or a neutral acid like distilled cooking vinegar or rice vinegar with coarse kosher salt, like this, and really scrub it into the board. Give it a good rinse off, you're gonna have some weird tasting food. So if you want to buy a plastic cutting board that you like, thicker may be better. And yeah, that's probably the only thing I think of. Yeah. Anyway, wood. I love wood. It's my favorite. I love wood cutting boards. Not only are they aesthetically pleasing, but just like I said, just like plastic cutting boards, they let your knife dig into it, and they're super nice. These you cannot soak. Do not soak your wood cutting boards. They will swell and begin to separate at the glue lines. If you can see the glue lines here, or where the pieces come together. The benefit, obviously, is that these boards don't warp. They're only a little more expensive than plastic cutting boards. They can also be utilized as a charcuterie board or some kind of presentation board. I've used this a few times to do like hors d'oeuvres or something like that for guests. The big downside to wood cutting boards is that they usually require 6-month or a yearly basis a new oiling. So just like any like wood-handled, do I have a wood-handled one? Just like any wood-handled utensil, like my knife here, you can see it. I usually give them a good oiling every 6 months or so. Or if I want to sand down this cutting board to have a nice, you know, scratch-free surface, it needs to be oiled with mineral oil or food-safe oil. This helps prevent it from swelling and from excess waters, bacteria, and stuff from sitting inside the wood. That's really the bigger downside of it. Not to mention, obviously, it's made of wood. It's usually heavier than plastic cutting boards, so if that's, for whatever reason, an issue in your kitchen, plastic may be the way to go. All right, it's tangent time. I don't like doing this, but I gotta do it. Listen, when it comes to wood cutting boards, you will see a lot of these in the grocery stores. Now, if you don't know what this is, my light is making it really weird. This is a bamboo cutting board. So, the bamboo cutting boards are cheap, and well, they're cheap for a reason. Bamboo has these really tiny grain, or these small fibers. You can actually see where the bamboo stalk was like growing at one point, where it shoots together. These fine grains make it really easy for someone with a sharp or extra pressure on the knife to cut these and start the board to splinter. And as soon as that process happens, it's just a matter of it unraveling over time. Not to mention, just like any wood cutting board, you don't want to soak them or put in the dishwasher. Bamboos especially susceptible to this, and I really don't suggest it, and I would feel bad if I didn't mention it to people. I know they're cheap, I know they're tempting, but please try to avoid these if you can. That's my PSA, that's my opinion, and that's my little rant on that. Last tangent. Online, you may have seen people talking about, or even seen like YouTubers or other people talk about, end grain cutting boards. This is nothing against them, just end grain cutting boards. So, end grain is this. So, when your tree is standing up in the forest, this is the long grain. This is the tree up in the, this is what gives the tree its, vertical strength and rigidity, right? This is what you see when you cut the tree down and you look down and you can see the rings and the growth of the tree. Now, the science behind end grain cutting boards is that the fibers align with how the knife goes down into it. So the knife can dig in a little more and it's softer on your steel to not hurt the edge or help edge retention. As opposed to long grain, which these are thick, cumbersome, your knife doesn't get to bite as much. I have used this knife and this cutting board for over a decade, and I have used wood and plastic cutting boards in kitchens for over a decade. I have never ever seen a difference, and I think end grain cutting boards are completely overpriced for something they don't really provide. Please get a cutting board, especially if you're getting a wood one that you like, you can care about and take care of, and don't worry about the hype of end grain cutting boards. With that being said, we'll move on to the accoutrement to cutting boards, the humble kitchen knife. Before I shot this segment, I thought I had more knives in this, and I don't know if that's a concerning thing in which I should go buy more to add to the collection, or I should probably stop. But anyways, speaking of buying knives, first off, you do not need this many knives in your home kitchen, and frankly, probably as a professional cook, you probably don't need this many. But I'm sure I'll get some clap back for that. When it comes to knives, or when it comes to this starting set of knives I'd recommend, there's 4 that I really want to touch on. We have our general purpose knives, which are like our chef knife, our cleavers, our sentokus, and other honorable mentions, which I'll get to in a moment. I also recommend getting yourself a bread knife, such as these serrated guys, and then a paring knife, 1 or 2 of these little guys, and then finally a fillet knife, a knife that you can use for general work when it comes to breaking down fish, chicken, beef, whatever it may be. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is the best brand? What is the best bang for your buck? What is the greatest knife you've ever talked about or heard about or whatever? And to be completely fair, the best knife that you could possibly own or possibly use on a daily basis is one that you're most comfortable with. Can you hold your chef knife or your cleaver for 6 hours at a time, or cut through 3 cases of rutabaga and not hurt your hand? Do you feel safe going from handling some greasy food product or having your wet hands and grab the handle and know you're safe holding that handle? It won't slip out and fly away from you. And believe me, I've seen it. What it comes down to is what is your personal preference, and at the same time, what is within your budget, which we will talk about that towards the end of this segment. But for now, let's talk about general purpose knives. Wrapping up what I was talking about in the introduction to this little segment here is, yes, there is a big difference in quality when it comes to material, comes to the flexibility, and comes to edge retention, and the thinner the profile blade makes for usually more precise cuts. That being said, for most home cooks, I don't believe that's a huge issue until you start getting into weird, obscure, or single beveled blades that are usually act more like chisels than they are, precision instruments for slicing through a cucumber. Like, for example, I would not take my Yanagi knife, which has a very thick top and taper, and do fine mincing of a shallot. It's not meant for that. That's why we have our general purpose knives. And speaking of which, we're going to talk about the 3 that I know more about, not necessarily the only ones. There's plenty of honorable other knives and mentions out there when it comes to it. But for this segment, we're talking about the sentoku, or toku. My Japanese is terrible, so I'm very sorry. The humble chef knife and or French knife. And then the cleaver.
or the vegetable cleaver, not to be confused with the meat cleaver. This is actually a thin enough profile to actually not just drive a wedge between your cuts. So, starting with the chef knife. Now, I don't know exactly how old this style of blade goes, but I know it became popular out of Germany and has been adapted around the world. The beauty of the chef knife is its versatility. Because the chef knife typically has a long curve and blade, it makes it so rocking motions or rocking cuts are very comfortable, and there's even more evenly distributed pressure at the top of the knife. You're not sitting on the tip of the blade, you're sitting at that front part of it to make your chops and make your cuts. The chef knife is usually, because of its length and because of the swoop, draw cuts are usually more preferable for your knife work. That doesn't mean you can't do chopping, you can't do push cuts, or you can't just whack at the blade. That being said, this is my recommendation because I'm also biased and I grew up and work in Western kitchens, so I love this guy. Next, kind of the other spectrum, is the cleaver. So this cleaver is incredibly popular around the world, especially in Southeast Asia and China. I love this thing, it's really fun to use. This, again, just because it's not designed the exact same way doesn't mean you cannot perform the same cuts. You can still do pull cuts with this knife, push cuts, chops, etc., etc. You may find it a little more damaging to the tip of the knife because there's less surface area that is contacting the board at one time, so some of your force is concentrated. Same goes with rolling cuts. It's not impossible to do with this, but if you see me go up a little too high, all of a sudden I'm putting a bunch of extra pressure on the tip of the blade, so it's either cutting into the cutting board really deeply or starting to bend your tip, which is not a good thing. We don't like bent tips here. Other than it just being a good general knife and great at chopping, it can also be used obviously to scoop up products and easily, you have a lot of surface area to smash, such as garlic, ginger, someone's fingers, whatever it may be. I love this thing. I do recommend them, but I do know that the round handle shape, and a lot of people here in the United States aren't probably familiar with cleavers, but they're really fun. Last, and kind of the in-between, is the Santoku or Santoku. Now, it does have a slight curve to it at the blade, just like the chef knife, so you can do rocking motions, but again, the tip has a limited surface area touching the cutting board, so you're kind of putting a lot of pressure at the top there. The Santoku can be used for pull cuts, push cuts, and regular chopping. The only reason I don't like these, I'm just not a big fan of Santokus. That's really it, just a personal preference. Again, I know this isn't a great example of one. This is kind of a cheapo I got years ago for a birthday present. But if you have the opportunity to try one, I would suggest it highly. Now, other honorable mentions that I have in the world of general purpose knives that not that I don't like them, I just haven't used them a lot. You have now, forgive me, my Japanese is really not good, and I'm not wearing my glasses. Kiritsuke. God, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It is a single beveled knife, which means that similar to my Yanagi knife, it only has a sharpened or a beveled blade on one side, and the back is flat, although there is a small berm there to help the blade come together. Now, this is not inherently a bad knife, it just, those kind of knives usually have a fairly thick spine or bolster, and sometimes, I don't know if you can see it, sometimes, especially when you get down to the top of the bottom of the cut, when the blade is up here, it turns and acts more like a wedge, like you're splitting a log of wood rather than a nice clean slice. So, not to mention the way you have to angle the knife to get a good cut on, it may be a little more cumbersome for new people just coming into the kitchen. The other knife I would like to mention is, again, Naki-iri. Naki-iri. My Japanese is terrible. Essentially, it is a rectangle knife, so similar to the cleaver, but much shorter and slightly longer. Again, an incredibly great general purpose knife. Has all the same benefits you get from a cleaver without having the same kind of height, and usually comes in a more traditional kind of ergonomic handles like this. Even though you can get hexagonal handles or rounded off handles. With that being said, again, please try your knives if you can. And with that being said, let's move on to knife number 2. Knife number 2, the paring knife. Focus camera, please focus. This is exactly why I'm a cook.
Anyway, paring knife is simple, sweet, and to the point. It is essentially, man, would you really focus, please, camera? Maybe, there it goes. Paring knife. Simply, it is just a shortened or smaller version of a chef knife or a utility knife, and some people would call it. They're usually fairly cheap, and they're used around the house just for the little work that you don't need to bring the big knife out for, or you can't use a big knife for. So let's say you're just trying to knock the top off of strawberries, trying to peel a potato if you don't have a peeler yourself, fluting mushrooms, tourneing, any scoring little tomatoes do a concasse, which we'll talk about later. These are great just to have in the house. They usually, like I said, usually pretty cheap, and honestly, as long as it's sharp and easy to work on, which I would kind of not recommend something like this because this paint thing chips off, as you can tell after sharpening a few times. With that being said, let's move on to knife number 3. Knife number 3 is a pretty straightforward, and you probably already own one, is a bread knife or the serrated knife. Think of the serrated knife or the bread knife as a saw. These teeth and ridges allow you to cut through things that have usually a rough or hard surface, but have a soft interior of flesh, such as a fresh loaf of bread. We also jokingly sometimes call this the baker's knife or the pastry's knife because all the bakers I know only use these, and their chef knives are usually dull or horrible. And again, I'm probably going to start a fight with that comment, but here we are. Now, when selecting a bread knife, usually I would go for something between 6 to 8 inches long. I think this is a 8-incher, I believe. And I usually prefer to find something with a little bit of a thicker blade itself. I got this from a thrift store a few years ago. I still like it, but the disadvantage is this has a lot of flex. I don't know if you can tell, if I can do the worm with it. Now, a problem with this is, let's say you have a baguette, which is usually fairly hard, and you want to get nice clean cuts out of it. Now, as soon as you finish that top crust, unless you have really good knife discipline, all of a sudden this flexible blade is going to take the path of least resistance, and it's going to wander or meander, and all of a sudden you finish your final cut through the bagel, hoping to impress your chef, and then all of a sudden it's wonky and it's not flat. To avoid that, I like to have these ones, which have very little to no flex. They have a wider blade, which means that there's more contact or more blade contact with the item to keep things in line. If you're a carpenter or anything like that, think of like a hacksaw versus a dovetail saw. One has a very precision-based job. The other one is not really, meant for that kind of same work, if that's kind of the best explanation I got. With that being said, let's move on to knife number 4, the final knife. The final knives we're going to talk about are fillet knives. Now, when selecting a fillet knife, the beauty of fillet knives is, again, their flexibility. Unlike the bread knife, you do kind of want this. Now, this allows the knife to run around bones, cartilage, or to get deep in between to separate silver skin. And it's very, very handy. This one, again, also has the curve. Sorry, not curve, but the good flex and bend. It does have a curve. These kind of fillet knives are very popular. I think maybe you've seen a lot of these within like tackle box kits or fishing kits. My only warning with these is if you're not well versed in using them, this really thin profile blade here can easily wander away or get away from you if you start digging into the cut, in which you don't have a reference point because the blade is curved. So if it's halfway in, you don't really know where you're going. That being said, with practice, that can be avoided. But these flatter blade ones or flatter edge ones, I constantly have a line I can see in which I know where the knife is going to go. So for all intents and purposes, I recommend something like this. But if you must, or if you're very used to one or fillet knives like this, my camera will focus, I recommend that. Now you might be sitting there asking, Cody, where do I buy these knives? Where do I want to get my knives from? Do I get them online, a grocery store? You want to go to a knife shop or a specialty chef store? And the answer is it's more of what is your budget and what are you planning to do with it? Because if you're going to work in the professional industry, you're going to have to understand you're going to have to spend around, anywhere from $75 to probably $150 for a really good knife. And not being said it's a rip-off or anything, but if you're just looking at the home cook or being someone who just wants to have a good knife at home, buying online is not a bad idea either. What's more important is understanding that do you trust the brand? Have you had a chance to test it? Or have what credentials it does have? There's so many weirdly branded knives I've never heard of, and you kind of get lost in it. So for me personally, some of the ones I recommend for at least the beginners and even introduction into professional kitchens, and I have a little list here, so forgive me if I look off camera because I can't remember everything. The first one I want to talk about is Kiwi. So Kiwi is a knife company from Thailand. I believe they started back in 1978. They make all variety of knives. They make cleavers, chef knives, fillet knives. I think I've seen a Yanagi knife from them. They're usually a little cheaper on the lower end of stuff, not to knock them. They're still fun, good knives. I usually find them at Asian supply stores or Asian markets and stuff like that. You can also find them online, I believe, through Amazon. I think I've seen them on Alibaba, but don't quote me on that. Next to that, kind of moving up, is especially in the United States, we have the Winco Dexter. Winco Dexters are everywhere. They are the blue, yellow, and green handled knives you see sometimes in restaurant supply stores or kitchens. The steel is, I think it's 440 stainless. I think I could be wrong on that, but essentially the steel itself is a softer steel, which means it doesn't usually shatter. It bends but does not shatter. It can easily be brought back to life with a honing steel or honing rod, and can be sharpened indefinitely. I have seen Dexter knives last for a decade, and even though they do look abused, they still work and still cut. Same with Dexter. Same as Dexter. They are incredibly common knives to find at the chef store or a restaurant supply store. Both American companies, but I believe their manufacturers are around the world. Another American manufacturing company is Mercer. So Mercer is one of the largest suppliers of the culinary schools here in the United States. Actually, my first set of knives were Mercer. So this slicer here and my bread knife here are my original knives from my my knife kit in culinary school. Mercer has a wide range of prices, from the introductory prices as low as I think I've seen like $55, $54, up to their higher end stuff. It kind of depends on the manufacturer and the steel type they're using, or I guess the series in which they have. But those are also great introductory knives, even for the home kitchen and to go into the professional one, that are within a good budget. Next is my personal favorite is the Victorinox. Victorinox is a Swiss company. My chef knife over here is a Victorinox. I have had this one for over a decade, my entire professional career actually, and I love them. They are priced a little higher. I think some of the lower prices, at least for the chef knives, are starting around $90 and get a little up. Again, great for introductory home cooks if you have the budget for it, and for going into the industry professionally. Next, we have a Japanese company that I am only familiar with because my coworkers have used them forever, and I've only heard good things about them. So take that with a grain of salt, as it is. Again, Tojiro Knife Company. They originally set up in Japan as a fruit knife company, and then in the 80s switched to kitchen knives and manufacturing. Those are kind of the brands. There's many more. You have Henkel's, you have Wusthof, you have Shun, you have Global. Those are all great brands. It's just those typically are on the higher end of the price range and not necessary. Global is really well known for having the full metal blades that are actually more, and if I remember correctly, specifically made for women in the kitchen. I don't know exactly what that means, but that was their claim to fame when I first heard about them. On top of the knife you want to purchase, I also suggest getting a hold of honing steels and honing rods. So this one right here is ceramic, and this one here is steel. Now, the ceramics are usually used for my harder steels or higher carbon steels, because it doesn't allow them to kind of fracture, and it's a little nicer on the blades. So my Unagi knife usually gets a ceramic if it ever needs it. And the steel is for the softer metals, such as my German ones. So my Victorinoxes usually get it. My Maxim around here somewhere usually gets it. And my Kramer. Along with that, you want to keep your knife sharp. Now, there's plenty of other people on this on YouTube themselves that do sharpening, and they show sharpening. I use a whetstone method, but if you don't want to get into that, don't have the time for it, or it's not something you're super interested in, there's nothing wrong just having one of those house sharpeners, those little draw knife sharpeners to have in your home. As long as you keep your knife sharp, because a sharp knife is a safe knife. Because a sharp knife won't roll out from under you, it won't blunt into the food product and end up getting you instead. So remember to keep your knife sharp. With that being said, I think we have covered just about everything. So now it is tangent time. I need some water before this tangent, and I probably don't need this right now. So, tangent time, which, man, this may be a regular thing. So, when it comes to selecting your knives, you'll see a lot of things that are labeled patent welded Damascus steel, white steel, steel type 530Z 742. I don't know. A lot of it is pomp. A lot of it is just like, oh, fanciness. Just because something looks nice, especially like Damascus steel, does not mean it's inherently a good knife. Not to say that there aren't great knives that are labeled Damascus, which is not really Damascus, but that's a whole other debate, or patent welded, or pattern welded. I can't remember. It's whatever it is. They're not inherently great knives, and sometimes you're paying for the markup of that like aesthetic, pleasing view than an actual decent knife. Let's be honest. The only people who are going to see your knife are you and your coworkers. Your customers aren't going to see it. Your family may see it and they may think it's really cool, but it is not worth the effort, the time, and honestly, you're probably going to start a fight in the comment section below. So, my next tangent: avoid ceramic knives. They may be incredibly tempting because of their cheaper prices and the reviews of like long-term sharpness and amazing edge retention. The problem is with ceramic knives, they snap and shatter because they are brittle. They may be hard, but the hardness doesn't necessarily mean they're durable. It means they're brittle. So let's take, for example, if I was to drop this knife or plunge this knife into the table, it'd stick. It wouldn't care. This is traditional stainless steel knife. Doesn't matter. If I did that with a ceramic knife, I'm going to chip the tip. Not to mention, sharpening a ceramic knife takes incredibly specialized tools and sometimes specialized skills to get it. For the sake of your own sanity, don't buy it. Another one I wanted to mention is, like I said before, these painted knives here, or these pattern ones. Don't buy them because this was a gift to me, actually. I have a lot of gifted knives I don't like, but I still use them. This will flake off eventually. It's semi-reactive sometimes with food, depending on who manufactured it. And like I said, during the sharpening process, I've already lost some of that color. You'll see a lot of really brightly colored sets at like a Costco or a Walmart or some kind of super center like that. My next warning is, again, I don't hate Sentoku. It's just I got this knife, okay? These dimpled, if you can see it, these little dimples here. Now, these are supposed to help with food release, as in keeping food from sticking to the blade, because obviously you're cutting into a blade with a flat surface and water tension and hydrogen bonding, and I'm not Neil deGrasse Tyson. Essentially, this creates a little air pocket to stop them from sticking. It works. It does work in most cases. The problem is that if you want to have a knife for a lifetime, how long do you think you can sharpen that blade before it gets down to those dimples? And that dimple no longer turns into a blade, but now you have a Sentoku that looks like a serrated knife. If you want a quality knife to have for a long time, avoid these dimpled blades. Because in a few years after sharpening, you will probably regret it. My last tangent, which I don't really have one here, but avoid these Mall Ninja looking chef knives and knives. These weird, intricately carved, like feathered blades, or these weird holes in the side of them, or these extremely curved knives, even more so like this. Just think of this. This is just the blade up here. They usually are made with cheap steel. They're usually cheaply manufactured, not all of them. The decoration will fade after a couple of washes, and sharpening is a hassle because of these decorations and weird angles. You can't get the perfect angle to get a knife sharpened. Not to mention they're usually completely unbalanced, and they don't. And then having an absurdly curved blade like this means you have less of the surface area of the knife contacting the cutting board, which means you have to work that much harder to get just a clean cut. So, with that being said on my tangents, and thank you for listening to my tangents, let's talk about pots and pans next. Now, even when talking about pots and pans, there's a variety of different materials, styles that you can choose from, and that will either help your culinary journey or hinder it, depending on how you use it, such as having cast iron pans rust on you, or having not seasoned your full steel pans. But with that being said, let's talk about some of the general pots and pans I kind of suggest for your kitchen to get started with, and then my preferences on materials. Now, if you haven't noticed already, all my pots and pans I have here, and pretty much all I own, are full stainless steel. Now, I love these because they are no rubber, silicones, there's nothing to melt on me, so I can go from my stove to the oven, vice versa. Super simple, I love them, they're easy to clean, easy to maintain. Wow, that was loud. Easy to clean, easy to maintain. Now, when it comes to what pots and pan styles I think you should have, at least to start with this series and to kind of begin with at least more Western cooking, is to have yourself a saute pan or two. So right here I have a 8-inch pan and I have a 10-inch pan. 10-inch pan, I can usually get like 3 or so chicken breasts in there pretty safely. Get them roasted. I can usually get 4 thighs in there. So depending on how big your family is or how much cooking you plan on doing at home, having 1 or 2 of these is great. Now, what makes a saute pan is the sloped angle that goes into the flat surface. And this is so you can move product and food very quickly and rapidly, because saute pans are meant for quick cooking. Searing, sauteing, that sort of thing. You don't braise or stew necessarily in here. You can reheat things in here, but it's typically not meant for much more than that. Next to that, you'd want to probably get your hand on a sautoir. This is a 3-quart sautoir. Again, slightly larger than my 10-inch saute pan. Now, a sautoir is a large surfaced area with a shallow or short wall. So this is you can find these anywhere between 3 to 4 inches. Now, the beauty of this is I can still sear in here like a saute pan. It's a little harder to be mobile and move, but not impossible. The high walls allow me to add liquids to this, so we can do braises, we can do some stews, and we can do reductions if we're making certain sauces or something in here. Or, what was the other thing I was going to mention? Whatever. Next, let's talk about some pots. So I have 3 here. You don't necessarily have to have all 3 here. It kind of depends on your house size. I have a 1.5, I have a 3-quart, and I have a 5-quart. Now, these pots are really simple. They're used for simmering, stewing, poaching, boiling. I've deep fried in these. It's anything that needs to hold a lot of liquid at one time. Think of your pots. Now, when it comes to purchasing pots and stock pots, which I'll talk about next, you want to have something that has a fairly thick bottom or thick base. Thick with 2 C's. The thickness of the steel or the metal will help retain heat more and distribute it more evenly as well. So you have a consistent, you have even distribution of heat, and it's especially prudent when you start talking about stock pots. Speaking of which, this is my my new big boy. I haven't even used this yet. I am excited to use it. This sucker is 16 quarts. 16 quarts of aluminum that needs to be cleaned. Now, the beauty of a stock pot is that typically, not that it is taller than it is like wide at the base. This creates a kind of a smaller mouth at the top, which means that when you start convection currents or you start boiling stuff off or simmering off, less evaporation can happen than at the top, so you kind of retain more of your product. Again, that's more prudent to stewing and stocks, but you can find these. I think I found this at a local grocery store actually for like $22. This is full aluminum. This will do everything I need, and I don't need to spring a lot on this because all I'm doing is boiling stuff in it, or I guess simmering. We don't boil stocks. Another reason to also have thicker bottom pots and pans, not just these guys here, but your saute pans, Because when we do deglazing and start talking about deglazing, as in when you're adding cold water or product to it, the thicker bottom pans will not warp on you. They won't start to react on you, as opposed to thinner ones that you see of cheaper metals. I'm not bashing on my non-stick here, but if I was to deglaze in the non-stick, I'd be asking for trouble. It would begin warping on me because I know the metal is thin, not to mention the non-stick coating doesn't usually appreciate that kind of temperature shift. That being said, non-stick pan I also recommend. This is just for simple, you're making French toast, pancakes, crepes, eggs, whatever it is. Great to have. I always suggest to buy these new because you never know what someone has used on it. Which, by the way, never, ever, ever use metal on these pans. It will ruin the coating, you will ruin the non-stick thing, and you will waste your money on it. Don't do it. Now, when it comes to purchasing, when you want to buy your own set, honestly, I think the best place to look, especially if you're just on a budget, go to your local thrift shop. And if you can find a few pots and pans that, fit in a semi-style and that they, work for you, I would buy them. I would get them. If you really, really, really want to have a nice set, you can find, all the Celebrity Indoor sets. I think this is an Emma Lagasse set. I've heard Martha Stewart set's pretty good. You can find those at department stores, Walmarts, Costco's, etc., etc. I also recommend, though, if you happen to not buy a full set, or the full set doesn't come with lids, these are some universal lids. I think these are both purchased off of, Amazon. They're both rated to 500 degrees Fahrenheit and are great to have because not all of my bigger pans and pots can fit this, have their own fitting lid. And I do want to touch briefly on some of the material. Just cursory, just so I'm doing my due diligence as kind of a introductory kitchen guide. So when it comes to pots and pans, you have a few that are really common in home kitchens. Stainless steel, as I mentioned. You also have cast irons and ceramics. Cast irons are great. They take a lot of time and energy to bring them up to heat. Like energy as in literal energy, energy coefficient stuff, like actual science stuff. And they retain their heat really well, because cast iron is really good at retaining its heat. So if you want something to keep a constant temperature for long periods of time, cast irons are great. My only complaint with them, other than them being slow to heat up, is also maintenance. You can't just throw them in the hot soapy water and scrub them away because you'll ruin the coating. And if you do that, you have to reapply coating. It's a whole heating process, and you have to recarbonize it, and it can be a headache. They're great pots and pans if you know how to take care of them. But if you don't, maybe steer away from them. The next one I want to talk about is ceramics or enameled pans. So they are just as useful as a stainless steel, and actually in some cases have a better heat retention than stainless steel, closer to cast iron. I do love them, but there are only two problems I have with them. One, you need to be very careful how you clean them. Some brands will score and scratch very easily if you have too abrasive of a sponge. Second, some ceramic and enamel pans do not like I said before, being deglazed or having this hot heated pan hit with like a lukewarm or even a cold liquid mixture like a stock or a broth or just water to quickly deglaze a pan. So be careful with those. The two other ones I kind of want to touch on is steel and high carbon steel. You'll usually see those in restaurants, not really for the home cook, but they act similarly to what you would see for cast iron. They need to be coated, in which they need to be carbonized. You have to add a thin layer of oil, get them blackened, so you actually create somewhat of a non-stick surface. And just like cast iron, they're prone to rust, and if you do mess them up or you do start, messing up the coating it has on it, they have to be scrubbed clean and then reapplied. With all that being said, hopefully that was a good introduction into the pots and pans and stuff I recommend. We will now move on to the utensils, the tools in which we use to actually, make food. Now, onto these guys, the utensils. And now you probably have a good chunk of these, if not all of these in your home already. And think of this as more of a refresher for those who already have everything they need. And for those just starting off, this is my cursory look into utensils. There are thousands of different things we can talk about when it comes to utensils, what you should and shouldn't have in your home.
but in all honesty, we don't have time for that, and it's not really necessary. Let's begin first with these guys. These are rubber-headed spatulas, or rubber spatulas, or rubber spats, sometimes you hear people call. I prefer them, or my utensils, to have metal or wooden handles because they won't melt on you. And if I accidentally leave them in a hot pan, or at the edge or the rim of a hot pan, they won't melt on me. This may catch on fire. This may be a little too hot, but I can still use them. Well, yes, because I'm a little bit of a pyro. Anyway, now we talk about the regular spatulas. Some people will refer to these as pancake turners. I just call them spatulas. I usually have one metal one, and I have one rubber or silicone one. This is just so for the sake of my nonstick pan, because we don't want to use metal in nonstick pans. This guy is for more of the heavy duty work. If I really need to get something scraped off the bottom, especially on my metal pans. I think I used this the other night to make my make some burgers. And from there, well, that's another metal spatula. We'll talk about this one in a later episode. But for now, let's talk about these guys. We have whisks. Now, I don't mind the rubberized handle on this one because it's really comfortable if I'm, whisking heavy cream or making whipping egg whites from meringue. And I don't mind the metal either because, again, it won't melt on me. These are both technically balloon whisks, and I recommend having at least 2 different sizes. These are a little similarly sized, but different enough for what I have in the kitchen. I really don't recommend getting the silicone or rubber-headed ones. I really suggest metal, especially stainless steel. It won't tarnish. It will bend on you, but it won't completely deform on you the same way that a silicone would. After that, let's talk about some wooden spoons or spatulas. Again, I prefer the wood because it's nicer on my nonstick pans. It won't, melt on me. And if I need to really scrape something off, I don't have to worry about ruining a coating or worrying about scraping metal on metal, which just sounds disgusting to me. After that, I recommend tongs. So always do safety clicks for tongs. I recommend having a set of at least some silicone or rubber-headed ones. Again, this is for the safety of a non-stick pan if you ever use it, or if you're doing any kind of service that you just don't want to hear metal on metal or metal on glass. Now, when choosing a pair of tongs, you want to make sure that they're long enough that you can use them without getting burned or oil splashed on you when you're working over a pan, but not so long that they're unwieldy. I have seen tongs literally that long, and I've only ever used them in some of the big grills and steakhouses I've worked at in the past. Now, with that being said, we have a few more miscellaneous items I want to mention, so let's get those collected out of the kitchen. And that we have in here. Yep. Oh yeah. They're down here. To mention more of the miscellaneous stuff that you saw me throw here on the table, things I recommend to have in the kitchen. Get yourself either a wire strainer or a colander. If you had to choose between the both, I would probably choose the wire strainer just because it's a little finer, easier to get. I prefer these ones because I can sit it over a pot or a large surface area with this big handle, and obviously this guy is big enough to sift out or strain out as much as I possibly need. Along with that, I recommend getting yourself some mixing bowls. Now, these are kind of plastic and flimsy, and I would recommend if you don't have a stand mixer, which I do, but it's not necessary for this, get something a little tougher. Usually like a firmer plastic or some of the tempered glass bowls I've seen, or I like mine's here. I have 2 big old stainless steel. I can mix as much of the stuff as I want here pretty easily. One of the mentions I forgot to kind of put forth in the utensil area is getting yourself a ladle. Now, I prefer the metal ones because with the silicone and plastic, they like to deform sometimes, or obviously when it gets heated, the silicone gets soft. And there's nothing worse than taking your hard prepared soup or consomme or whatever you're doing, trying to pour it into a bowl, and the ladle to go limp. So stick with metal, my friends. Other than that, I suggest having a collection of measuring equipment.
So first things first, having your set of measuring spoons. It looks like my wife got the cacophony and collection of them all. There's an 1/8 of a teaspoon here and a 2 tablespoon here, as well as having some liquid measuring cups. I have a 2 cup and a 4 cup here. Next to that, you have your dry measuring cups. 1 cup all the way down to 1/4 cup. I know some people prefer 2/3 cups and getting 3/4 cups and all that. It doesn't matter as long as you can measure accurately. And for final measurement, I do recommend a scale. This is just a little digital scale I picked up for like 25 bucks. You can use spring scale. It doesn't really matter as long as you can consistently, actually have a temperature, or is that temperature? Take a weight, because weights and ratios are gonna be really important moving forward. Next to that, you want to get yourself a thermometer, little stem metal thermometer. This one comes in Celsius and Fahrenheit, and I bought it pretty cheap online. I think I have about 5 of these in different colors just because I use them all the time at work. Next to that, get yourself a peeler. This little Y peeler here, I love. They're super cheap, they're super easy, they're usually pretty sharp. This one has the weird stem stripper on it. I've actually never used it, but I would recommend having one of these in the house. Next to that, let's talk about some sheet trays and pans. So this is a roasting pan. It is a non-stick-ish pan, but it doesn't really matter as long as you have a roasting pan. The roasting pan usually should be thick enough that it won't warp on you at high temperatures. So you're going to be roasting bones, vegetables, tomatoes, onions, whatever for an extended period of time. And the worst thing you can have it do is warp and bow and bend on you. You don't have to have non-stick. Like I said, you can have full stainless steel, full aluminum. It does not matter. Next to that, having yourself some sheet trays. These are what we call rolled edge, or some people call them jelly roll trays. If you can see here, the edges are folded or rolled in of their aluminum. And the rigid structure of that roll helps them prevent, again, from warping under under temperature. Which I have seen a few of just really cheapo non-stick pans just pop up, and I've seen cookie dough just fly off into the oven. And it's not pretty. Not to mention, if these get beaten up, you can scrub the crap out of them and bring them back to life real easily. The last and most important thing I really, really recommend you having is to have a notebook. A notebook or some kind of a journal, because one, in this series and continuing series, there's going to be a lot of vocab words, a lot of terminology that are going to come up. And even if you're not going to professional industry, this is super important. This also is a place that you can write down your notes of when you cook food. What tasted good, what didn't taste good, what worked, what did not work. I already have one of these full of other random recipes and random PS and plating techniques I've been thinking of, but this is super important. Plus a Sharpie. Not for the notebook per se, but for labeling your stuff. And usually when I buy these by the 20 pack if I can find them. With that being said, I don't really have much else to offer you. I think I've said all my piece I can with the beginning of this series. And I really hope that it's been helpful. And if it has been helpful, and you want to keep up and keep on going with this journey with me, please consider leaving me a like if you liked it, or dislike if you disliked it. Drop a subscribe if that's if you want to follow us. It's kind of surreal doing this. I've been thinking about doing this for years, and I finally said screw it and let's do it. That being said, I have been Cody. This has been Curious Kitchen. I hope to see you next time in my following episodes. We'll be talking about stocks next. Until then, though, join the comment section, which will probably be complaining about knife steels and densities in Damascus and patent welded below. Until then, thank you.